being out here. And oh, there it goes. Yes, got it. Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm in Colorado. I am not local to Philadelphia, just so you know. I chose this talk because it seems to be like the rise of the supervillain now that wants to squash notions of distributed or remote software development. So I figured, hey, this would be timely. And right now, we've got a couple people on the line I work with. Stephanie and Nick we all work together on the same team. So I wanted them to come here and help share what kinds of things we're doing as a remote or distributed software development team. Okay, so yeah, without further ado, I want to ask questions of the audience first. Maybe what are some of the reasons why we want to be remote, why we might want to prefer being remote as software developers as opposed to driving into an office? Any thoughts on that? What are some benefits or things that you personally get out of it?
Nice to be around family during the working day.
There you go. Nick is, he's got actually, we have a new developer on the team. She's about a foot and a half high or so. And
oh, come on, Sonia.
There's a perfect example. What else?
So Stephanie said no commute. She dropped that in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah,
oh yeah,
California.
Yeah, let me pop up the chat. Oops, sorry. So I don't miss some of these. Yeah, so I'm seeing some reasons also come up in the chat. So let's see, able to work with people that aren't physically located somewhere else. There we go. Less costly to employees. I imagine a lot of companies saved a lot of money for 2 years during COVID. Let's see, all my resources are right here. So yeah, it's convenient. It's more comfy being at home. There's no commute time, no pants. I love it. There actually is a book around the year. It's called The Year Without Pants. No commute, which means no gasoline costs, no time wasted on the roadway, no stress of the commute, and no pollution for everybody else, and so on. So there's all sorts of great reasons to want to be remote. Maybe what are some of the reasons why remote development is worse? Why do Elon Musk and other people, other known CEO supervillains hate the idea?
Part of it's also you miss that accidental contact that all of a sudden you hear about a problem somebody's having and you can help fix it, or something, or an inspiration that you move on to.
That's right. Yeah, I just had that conversation with my wife today about one of the things I miss about being fully remote is that you miss those types of opportunities.
Yeah, the flip side is managers thinking they need to see everybody at the office in order for them to know that people are working.
Yeah, I think that's one of the supervillain reasons is it's a control aspect. I think they feel some loss of control over things when people are not showing up to the office. It's hard to see who's staying until 9 o'clock at night, that sort of thing. But yeah, absolutely, you do miss out on overheard important conversations that you need to hear. Any other thoughts? Let's see. Oh,
It's a lot easier building relationships when you're face to face.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm seeing some of the echoes of these in there as well. Yeah, absolutely. So to me, software development is a social thing. And I'll go through a little bit of why I think that, but I don't like working alone. I'm one of these people who definitely wants to be interacting with others as I develop things throughout the day. So, all right, so let's move into the talk itself. I always start a lot of my talks with pieces from the Agile Manifesto that talk about why we want to do things or why we might not want to do certain things. So the very first thing out of the Agile Manifesto are, oh, gee, we want to uncover better ways of developing software by blah, 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 and we've come to value individuals and interactions. So that is really at the core, the heart of what it means to have a team building software. It is all about us communicating, talking with one another, and truly collaborating is a word I'll use throughout this talk. So we want to favor those over processes and tools. And if you go to the flip side of the manifesto and look at the Agile principles, there's another interesting one that pertains to this talk, which is we find that things are going to be most effective and efficient if we are facing each other as we build the software. Conversations that are continually happening amongst the team. So actually, I realized just like at lunchtime, it's like, well, this isn't an Agile group, it's an XP group. So I went through my slides and I found something from, by gosh, you'll see the date on the bottom. This is the original slide to a talk I gave in 2001. So XP also has some values around communicating and feedback, which I think can be construed as if you combine those two, you have some notion of collaboration. We're working together, we're communicating. If you were in an XP team in the early aughts, then you would have been probably around a shared table, pair programming and whatnot, and communicating, collaborating with each other full time. So all that to lay the ground for what's to come. So just, I always love to toss these slides in when I can. So this is a bit of personal history of me over the past 40 years of building code. Just to talk about from a stance of a blueprint. So this is an overhead view of the first office I had when I got paid to start building software in 1982. This is co-collaborator Chris and me sitting in what was literally a Coke room. So just to explain the diagram a bit, I think that's a shelf off to the left, but what you're seeing above where it says Chris and me is an overview of a big fat monitor, a chair with a big round head sitting in it. So that's me sitting next to Chris. What was interesting is this is my first exposure to software development. I thought, oh, this is kind of cool to be able to sit next to someone and chat with them about building software. Only problem is we really didn't do much of that. We kind of each had our own thing. We listened to the radio a lot, so we were talking about what was on the radio. But that was as close as we got to really collaborate. Every once in a while, I'd ask Chris to say, hey, take a look at this and see what you can do to help me out. So, that was an interesting first experience. It was literally a Coke machine room. So at the bottom, we had a little drain in the middle. And every once in a while, I just hose it down after we've been in there for a few weeks without showering. Moving on, I ended up the very next gig also in a purportedly collaborative environment. Only problem is you'll notice the chairs are not facing each other. They're all facing the walls, or in my case, the window. And being the 1985 or so, the joy of this one was smoking was allowed in the office. So this was one of the treats of getting to work closely with other people. Jay was a more elderly gentleman, probably about 65 at the time. And he would, Doug was my age, maybe a year or two older. He would light up unfiltered Marlboro cigarettes throughout the day. And I stunk like high heaven. So same kind of thing. I would need a shower at the end of the day. Jay smoked pipes, and every once in a while I'd hear this like whap, whap, whap. And he'd say, oh shit. And I'd turn around and sure enough, his pants leg would be on fire. So, you start realizing maybe you want your own office. That'd be kind of cool. And in fact, the next two jobs I had were me in isolation in the back of a computer room with a big mini computer in the middle, lots of air conditioning, one other person who was the operator for the machine, putting tapes up, loading things and so on. And then a manager somewhere outside the computer room. So this was kind of cool. You could go off and hide and play video games when you wanted, or text adventure games back then. But certainly not at all collaborative. Every once in a while, I talk to my boss and ask questions and so on. But again, it wasn't until I moved into a cube farm. So there's a few jobs in succession with this notion of everybody's going to be grouped in the same big room, and there's probably 100 different cubes in here. I just kind of felt like a piece of cattle being pushed around in these. And even though it was everybody in the same room, it really didn't invite this notion of actually sitting, working side by side with people. So it was still a bunch of individuals in a very large room together working on their own things. I really didn't know what it was like to do. Oh my God, how many cows are there? What is truly collaborative work until I ended up at a place called MCI. For the older folk, they'll know what it is. For the younger folk, it is a telecom that existed until about 2000. What I saw here, we were again in a cube farm, but an interesting little observation. I noticed I was working with two women, and every once in a while, after a while, they started working together every day, day in, day out. Everybody else on the team's like, what in the world is going on here? But they were sitting next to each other, talking quite a bit. And the rest of us started complaining, actually going to manager and saying, what's going on with this? Why do you have two people sitting side by side when they could be split up getting more work done? So I actually went up and asked them about it, and they're like, no, we're getting actually work done more rapidly and so on. I'm like, I don't know if I buy that. But who was I to say how other people should work? So this is 1991. I noticed this well before the advent of pair programming in XP, and we'll come back to that in a bit. So I chewed on it a little bit, but really didn't give it much thought after that, thinking that software development was this solo activity after having done it alone so many years. The really cool experience I had was when I got sent to Atlanta for about a month in 1995 while at MCI. And they effectively threw half a dozen or so of us in a room, shut the door, and said, okay, you got a month, build some software together. Okay. It was probably, even to this date, one of the coolest experiences I'd ever had. So rather than saying, well, I'm not sure what to do here, and stew about it in my cube for, half hour to an hour, and then finally figure maybe I should go ask somebody something. It was people talking over the monitors, talking about how to solve problems and actively working together to build code. And by God, we got this stuff done in a month. So that actually was a kind of a turning point for me to understand that, things can actually go much better if you're not trying to do this all on your own. So that was MCI. That was 1995. After that, I ended up at a .com where it was literally a abusive, collaborative environment. Brian here would every once in a while grab one of those AOL CDs that used to be everywhere and literally throw it at me and try to hit me on the hand. He would wait until I dropped something on the floor, and then he would take it and try to get my hand with the CD about as hard as he could. So back to maybe not enjoying collaboration so much. Okay, so the other key idea that came into my head is that this whole notion of extreme programming. 1999 is when I found out about this. I saw Kent Beck talking about XP at a conference, and I'm like, well, that sounds really interesting. It sounds like may start solving some of the problems we had at MCI while trying to do things like spiral development. So TDD was really eye-opening for me. The thing I didn't think so much of is now I'm seeing this pair programming thing again. I'm like, it sounds interesting, but I don't know that I would really want to do it. Well, turns out I ended up working at a company called Object Mentor and having to coach people on extreme programming and, of course, pair programming. So I did learn what it's all about. Quick question, quick poll of folks. How many people are actively either pair programming or mob programming today? If you can do like a raise of hands, that would help. I'm only seeing a few hands up top. Oh, there's one. So a smaller number of people. I'm going to ask another question related. How many people actively detest the idea of having to pair program with other people throughout the day? And if you would raise your hand, you might have to lower it and raise it. So Brett, your hand is still up. I noticed you put your hand up earlier to say you are pairing. Oh, it's down now.
Yeah, sorry about that. I
Okay.
do enjoy it.
We'll come back to this thought. I'm going to suspect the vast majority of the software developers really don't want to be involved with pair programming. We'll come back to that. Just for a quick definition, we'll talk about navigators and drivers. The keyboard in a good pair should be moving back and forth if we are physically doing this together in an office somewhere. So we got a driver at the keyboard, the navigators purportedly telling them, go do this next, code this next, and here's the general direction we're heading. The driver's translating that navigation into actual code. The keyboard should definitely be going back and forth for that. So you want to switch roles every once in a while between driver and navigator. You also probably want to be swapping pairs fairly frequently and not getting stuck in what we'll call pair marriages, where you feel like you're joined at the hip with another developer. Just to keep, so what's a good reason why we want to do the pair swapping if we are pair programming? What are some
fresh
reasons?
ideas or different viewpoints?
Yeah, absolutely. You get new ideas into the mix. Two people might have been feeling like they're starting to go down a rat hole, or maybe it's nice just to swip in a third party and have them bring some fresh concepts into the mix and come up with a better solution. Code quality in the same manner. Knowledge transfer. You're starting to share the knowledge of all the pieces of the system throughout all the developers involved, as opposed to having these silos that happen. Sharing context with others. Absolutely. So there's a lot of good reasons to be swapping frequently. I've seen places that do it fairly often, like 3-4 times a day, which can be really effective. There is a cost to it, a little context transfer overhead cost involved with that pair swapping. So maybe you don't want to do it every 10 minutes. But typical teams, I think, will have a stand up and figure out who the pairs are for the day, and then they might swap on a daily basis. I've seen other teams where they tend to stick a little longer, and I found that to kind of start miring back into, well, two people are solving a problem start to finish, which means we're not going to get this benefit of knowledge transfer or better solutions as much, because we're not getting fresh ideas into the mix before we finished off features or stories. Anyways, so here's a few ideas for keeping pairing effective. Why do we pair in the first place? Why did someone, Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham, think that pair programming would be a good way to develop software all the time on a team? And later step back a little on that, but what's the value in pair programming?
I mean, one thing might be that the idea that maybe more eyes on the code mean less mistakes.
Okay, yeah, you're going to increase your quality. I mean, 2 heads are better than
Yeah.
one.
It's basically constant code review.
Constant code review. Yeah, the term I think I've heard most use is active review. We want to make sure, rather than build code and then have people come back later and spend time ramping up on the code and then critiquing it and then hoping it gets fixed and re-reviewing all that, let's actively review things. In fact, that's one of the extremes in extreme programming. If review is good, let's do it all the time. Pair programming was a way of actually doing that sort of active review all the time. Let's see. Encourages collaboration earlier than when you're stuck and your duck doesn't know the answer. There you go. Hopefully it's not just a duck, and I'll talk about that on, I think, the very next slide. But yeah, absolutely. We want to not waste time trying to find the answer on our own. So if we've got 2 people there, it's going to double the chances that one of those 2 people will actually know a good solution toward the current problem. Any other ideas on why we might want to pair?
Reduce your bus number.
Reduce your bus number. Well, there you go. That's with the knowledge transfer, right? So if we are a siloed team, we always panic that the only database expert on the team wins the lottery, or more violently gets hit by the bus, as Paul's getting at. So yeah, helps maintain focus. Oh, that's a really good one. Thank you, Amitai. And hi, Amitai. I haven't seen you in a while. Builds communication and trust amongst peers. I always used to say, you do this pairing well, and it's going to build a much better sense of team than you'd ever seen before. You really have to understand each other and be able to communicate well with everybody else on the team. The maintain focus, I think an amusing thing I started finding is you can be in a really crowded room and pair programming, and people would tend to, first off, interrupt you less because they would see 2 people actively conversing and building software. But the other thing is, I think it helped block out all the other distractions from the noises in the room. So that was kind of cool. Personally, in the time when I'm working by myself, yeah, it's distractions. Right. So it helps diminish the distractions to the 2 of you working together. So there's a lot of good reasons for it. By the way, as mentioned, here's the next slide, which hints at what Tim Oninger calls the worker-rester pattern, with one person doing all the work, the other one kind of sitting back and either falling asleep or being distracted by their phone or something. If you're doing that, what was that? What was that, Nick?
Which is torture.
Yeah, it's not pairing, and it's pointless. If you're going to do this, excuse me, don't even bother the pretense of pairing, because it's not going to be any more effective for the most part. You might get this watcher person, we call the person sitting back, they'll add some value once in a while, but it's really not worth the cost of two people trying to ostensibly build code together. There's all sorts of variants on pairing. I'm not going to go into these, but just to suggest there's not one hard and fast way that things had to be done. So you can have two people at two keyboards. You can do face-to-face that some people try. You can certainly do remote pairing. Here's the first hint of this discussion being about remote. And I did some of this, and I think that comes up on the slides later. There's a lot of arguments about why not to pair, and usually the simple thought is, gee, we've got two people doing the work that one person would be doing. So the naive thought is that it costs twice as much. Honestly, no. If you start looking at a lot of other things that a solo developer might be doing and wasting time on, you realize certainly it's somewhere in between the cost of one versus two people. So there's defects, the cost of a defect and the time to debug and the time to rework the code that you probably should have gotten right in the first place. Building a design that makes everybody expend more effort every time they touch the code or read the code. The time to sit and think and mull things over when a second person might have a quicker answer or a better answer that moment, and so on. Loss of key knowledge, we talked about the bus factor. Developers who are just not quite up to snuff and maybe would get there with a bit of help from another pair. New developers to the team, they have to learn all the new stuffs in the system to be able to be trusted to develop on it and so on. So there's all sorts of cool little things like that. There's some other little odd benefits that as I started coaching multiple teams back 20 some years ago, I would discover. So Paul and I worked together a bit at a place. Is Paul still on the call? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there he is, upper corner. So Paul and I worked at this place called escrow.com, which is no longer, but we had an interesting setup with 3 different teams and different sizes. So the larger team that I was doing most of the coaching on was 6 people. There was another smaller team with 4 and yet another one with 2 people on it. And what was the incident that occurred was 2 of the people on the larger team were basically almost at fisticuffs every time they worked together. They couldn't agree on anything. They argued about everything. Paul, do you remember who these were or not? Oh, you do? Okay.
I will not name names, but yes.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. But yeah, they were at loggerheads. And then someone had the brilliant idea that it's like, okay, let's just get one of these knuckleheads off the team and then swap them out with someone from one of these smaller teams. I don't remember which one it was. But what was interesting, it was actually a boon to both teams for, first off, the reason that they weren't fighting all the time and basically destroying the productivity of the larger team. But the other thing was they were able to do what we call cross-pollinate. So each person moving to the other team brought some really useful stuff. Like one of them, when they came into the larger team I was coaching, said, oh, I see you're doing this here. We've already built a library. You're starting to build this here. We've already built a library that will will immediately solve that problem. So you don't have to spend a day or 2 that it's going to otherwise take to build it. So you start to see these little cool attendant benefits from collaborating with others and specifically pair programming. I got to the point of actually working in one team that had 17 people around the table pair programming. It seemed nuts, but we were highly productive. We had some other challenges, but it was really cool. It's also this noisy environment where I learned that by pairing, you can block out all the noise from the other 2 teams out there in the larger room. So that was kind of cool. So last, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 more, but then I'll get into the other side of the fence on this talk. I ended up at Nationwide in Cleveland high-risk division, and I was invited to come work with some folks and help them learn test-driven development specifically. So I remember going up the stairs to meet these people. John Stahl is one of them. Cheesy's another one. These are both now, well, Lean Dog is what they started up. Jeff came over to Industrial Logic, where I'm at now. But I'm talking to him. I see this room and I see an XP team working around this big round table with about a half dozen or so pairs. And you could tell just by walking in and watching this team that they loved what they were doing. They were building lots of what looked like quality code from glancing at it for a few minutes. They were just having a good old time. There was posters and dangly things from the ceiling and just looked like a really fun place to be. So I'm like, I told John, I said, gee, this looks like this is going to be a really fun engagement. This team looks like they know what they're doing, so maybe I can help hone some things. And John's like, dude, you're not working with them. He said, let's go walk around the corner, and there's a around the corner. So my job eventually came to be, let's go out to the cube farm. Let's find people who might want to actually work in the happy team, and then maybe start teaching them how to do things like tester and development. And so it actually worked pretty well. We would find people, it's like, oh, those people look like they're having a lot of fun on the happy team. You know, I want to get in on that. So we would bring them in. Meanwhile, we would actually send one of the developers on the happy team out to the cube farm to also start pairing with other people throughout. So it was this basically slow but sure way of spreading the ideas throughout the rest of the thing, the organization. And after 4 years, they ended up with essentially 4 really core kick-ass XP teams throughout, which was a really nice benefit. Anyway, I did some work remote. So now we're starting to come more to the remote side of the fence. Tim Oninger and I worked at a company about 11 years ago where we were all what they would call satellite developers. And we would actually pair programming every day as satellite developers. It was a little frustrating. First off, back then there weren't a lot of tools for collaboration. Second, we would tend to do more, one person would share and the other person would kind of watch and offer ideas all day long because it seemed like a pain in the rear to swap those roles. And so it did get to be a little more tedious. I would tend to start falling asleep literally as I'm watching people. Like, okay, I'm getting bored here. So it was not bad, but it wasn't near as effective as what I hoped remote development might be. There were lag times to deal with. So we would try to do things where you would share into other people's screens. You would try typing a little bit of code, but every character you type is lagged by like a quarter second or so. So it seemed very frustrating. You make a mistake, that lag compounds, and it's just awful. Not a fun experience if you've ever done screen share and then remote control of other people's machine. Did that for about a year. Came back home to Colorado Springs. Came back to to doing full-time work in Colorado Springs on a short contract. And I realized at this point that after doing pair programming for 10 years I really, really hated this idea of having my own office. But I had one with a door, which nowadays, in many companies, developers love that idea. It's like, hey, I get to go in my own place, shut the door, do what I want, put my headphones on. For me, it was horrifying. I will never go back to this kind of development. And it certainly played out that way. I was tossed on a system and expected to be able to do all the work on it. I had no teammates. I had one person who had worked on that software before. He was finishing up. So literally throughout the day, I would get up every once in a while. It's like, oh shoot, I've got a bunch of questions. Let me go 3 doors down, see if Wayne's there. Wayne's got Wayne's headphones on. Sometimes Wayne wasn't there. I go back to my desk and like, okay, I'm kind of stuck. Can't really do anything until I get some answers. So to me, it was, you realize at some point pair programming almost becomes a crutch to say, you know what, I'm stuck on something. I've got this other person that I can lean on and get answers from. Once you lose that, you realize how much you miss it and this ability to very quickly bounce ideas off of other people and get better solutions and quicker answers to your problems. I moved on later to a company called Outpace where I did full-time development for about 3 years. We would do pairing online. It was pretty effective. By then we learned a little bit more about how to do it, get a little more responsiveness by using things like Tmux or Teammate. That helped. So there were some technical solutions that made it better, but I was still finding it's like, there's a lot of overhead. We still would get stuck in pair marriages, and there were a lot of little frustrating things that I thought came along with pair programming. So in fact, you start to think about all of the what I call overhead costs of pair programming. There's a lot of little things that come up, that crop up that we have to deal with one way or another. Novice, you don't want the blind leading the blind. People who have poor hygiene, people who are sick and spreading this to everybody. I don't get along with Paul. Paul drives me nuts, or I drive Paul nuts, and he wants to, reach over and slip my wrist for me. So there's all sorts of little things. Paul likes to work in this IDE. I hate it. Vice versa. Physical accommodations. I was in one place where there was no way to physically set up the ability to pair because the cubicles were so small. Accessibilities, we find a way around all of these. We find solutions, but they are all elements of overhead that pairing incurs. I already mentioned that one. So there's a lot of things, and it just keeps going off the screen. And in fact, if you talk to the average developer who has ever pair programmed, or who has ever been threatened with the notion of, oh, you're going to have to pair program, usually that's the reaction. I don't know how many of you see this, but every time you talk to other developers who aren't so in love with it, most of them hate the idea. So most of them will not work in an environment if they're told they're going to have to pair. So I've always thought that was interesting. I always tried to overcome it, and you try to sell it as much as you can. I always enjoyed it. Well, no, that's not true. I didn't always enjoy it. It wasn't Paul who was the one, but I've worked with some people that I probably would never want to pair with again for more than 2 minutes. Some people just, it's really hard to work with them. People try to steamroll you at times. So there's all sorts of little things like that. There are people who just want to argue the whole time. So there's a lot of little things we have to worry about when we pair. I later came across something known as randori sessions, which is a little more free form than what we're going to talk about shortly with mob programming. But the idea was you put a pair in front of a bunch of other folks. Usually we did these for katas or exercises or just for fun, sometimes for production software. But the idea would be that the pair up front would work towards solving a problem. The rest of the audience would sit and offer ideas, throw things at them, and suggest better ways of doing things. And it's kind of cool. Free form, so I didn't do it terribly often. Then I came across this notion of mob programming. It's probably around 2015 or so. Woody Zuhl, I think, puts it best, and Woody's probably the one. He was at the original company, Hunter Industries, where they kind of structured the whole notion of how mob programming should work. He puts it best with this quote on here, which I'll just shut up and let you read for a second. Anyway, that's Woody. You can go read a little bit more at mobprogramming.org, which goes into some details and things that they found out about how to do this best. What it looks like if you're in person, you got a big monitor on the wall. You got a single keyboard up front. You got one person at that keyboard that we'll call the driver, and then you have the audience that we would typically call the mob. By the way, they're trying to come up with better names for things. Mob is in the US not so offensive. In Europe, it actually can mean bully. So people kind of will be taken aback at the notion of bullying others. So ensemble programming is one of the names that others do call this, particularly European folks. In any case, seems interesting. How many of you have actually done mob programming that are on the call? Raise your hands also. I'm trying to get a sense of coworkers. Yes. Okay. So we'll actually do a demo of how this is structured in a few minutes here. Software teaming. Woody came up with software teaming. I hadn't heard that one. The thing I don't like about ensemble is I don't want to say I'm going to go do some ensembling. It just sounds awkward. I'm going to go do teaming. I don't know. So I prefer
participate in an ensemble, I think, more so than ensembling. But
yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it sounds highfalutin or something to me, and it's not quick to. It doesn't roll off the tongues too quickly.
Yeah, software teaming seems too generic, but
yeah, that doesn't really help either. No. All right, so we'll start. Let me start discussing how this can work successfully. As mentioned, the idea is just to get everybody in the room to solve the problem. So this can be the whole team. More typically than not, it is the developers on the team. But this actually can succeed very well if you can manage to get the UI designers in there, the requirements or business side of the fence who can describe what it is you're going to build and so on. The more that we can get them to participate, the more this gives us a very successful collaborative environment where we are delivering higher quality software and sooner. The more we start breaking it into, well, it's just the developers, we have some of the old problems of making sure we get the answers in a timely fashion. But yeah, the core idea is let's get the whole team working together. Seems like almost obscene in terms of if you thought that pair programming was two people doing the work of one, this is the whole team doing the work of one from a very naive mentality. So we'll come back to why it's maybe not. For now, to do this successfully, most of this is common sense about getting along as a bunch of folks working together. We have to make sure it's a comfortable and safe environment for where folks feel like they're not getting steamrolled or anything. And we do have to look at how we're doing things from time to time to make sure that we're fixing any little problems or glitches in how successful we are. So that's all fairly common sense. What's not common sense is how we structure things to make sure it clicks well, that we don't have bad side effects come out of a bunch of people in the room working together. So there's two rules. First rule is we do what's known as strong style navigation. So earlier I'll harken back to the definition of pair programming, which was one person, a navigator, telling another person, a driver, what to do. You don't have to pair that way. In fact, a lot of pairs are more free form, where it's just, let's just do what we want when we want. Whoever's at the keyboard can maybe decide where we're going to go, or maybe it's the person sitting next to them. We try to enforce this notion in mob programming of strong style navigation for a few reasons. And the general rule is stated as, Llewellyn Falco says, if you're going to code something up, someone else is telling you what their idea is about what we should be coding next, and you are translating it into the code by pressing the keys on the keyboard. So in other words, people have to vocalize to the rest of the mob what it is we're working on, so that everybody's on the same page in terms of what we think we're trying to do at this very moment, what we're trying to build. So reasons for this, well, first off, it starts to get rid of the domination factor, because we're very quickly going to find out that you're also switching the driver fairly often. It means I can't be at the keyboard and do what's known as run away with things and go off in a direction that maybe the rest of the team isn't agreeing with. So that sort of domination is killed by the notion that you're not allowed to put something in the computer because that you want, because you're listening to everybody else decide on the direction that we're heading. There is a fear factor to being at that keyboard. And I've actually seen this firsthand with people who were starting to learn about mob programming. That starts to diminish a bit because it becomes very clear that you're not expected to be coming up with all the answers when you are the driver at the keyboard. You're listening to the rest of the team. They're coming up with the brilliant ideas collectively, and your job is to just learn how to translate. And there's probably still a little fear for people when they think, oh, geez, others are going to discover that maybe I don't know all the nuances of React. We learn to get over that quickly, and really the job of the whole team is to help you through that, to step you through. So they're describing things that they might start describing at a high level and say, we need a method that does this. And you might be at a very low level. It's like, method? How do I do that? So we start to learn to bring our translation levels down a little lower. Okay, well, you're going to need a method, and to do that, you might have to type public void, X, parens, and so on. So our communication is at the level appropriate for the driver to be able to understand and implement. And over time, that generally quickly gets better with most developers on the team. Let's see, Nick's comment. Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, you're also, well, in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about this domination and fear stuff from another angle. We are all leveling up much more rapidly. So Nick, Stephanie, and I started on an effort where we were doing a lot of styling and whatnot in React, and I'm okay in React. Stephanie's learning more React, and Nick seems to be the React expert. But a couple months into this, we're all pretty comfortable with all the stuff that we're doing on this. A couple of weeks in, we were all feeling much better about things just by sharing across the team. It's generally pretty easy to keep engaged in this manner too. If you're going to be the driver in the next few minutes, you're definitely paying a lot more attention because you need to be able to pick up where the last person left off. We do short timed rotations. We will typically put a timer on, particularly early off in the team, just to help people understand that what we're trying to do is build software in small incremental chunks, for one. For two, so these can be 2 to 5 minutes. Typically, we are running 5 minutes if we turn the timers on, just to try to keep things clicking. but it also helps to minimize this domination notion. No one person has I mean, even if you're in the mob dominating the discussion, and we usually have talks about how maybe not to do that so much, you're going to be at the keyboard at some point, and maybe you think you have all the brilliant ideas. It's really up to the rest of the team, though, to decide where you're going. So you have to learn to listen to others on the team. So that similarly helps diminish some of that domination. And the fear, it helps with the fear too, because by gosh, what's the worst that can happen in 5 minutes? So the one woman I mentioned earlier, she was terrified of this notion of sitting in this hot seat for 5 minutes. And first day, you could tell she was very nervous. By the end of the next week, she was actually one of the ones promoting doing this on her team. So it was really cool how quickly she turned from being very fearful and uncomfortable to really relishing working this way. Short rotations also, again, maximize engagement and help us build in small focus in increments. So these two rules taken together, I think, are the secret sauce to doing mob programming successfully. It's not anywhere near free for all. It's fairly structured in this way. Over time, you can start to relax these rules. But if you wanted to try this, I'd absolutely recommend making sure these two rules are in place in order to give this a really good chance for success. One thing I keep have heard many times, I started doing this fairly heavily about 5 years ago, I guess. I would have teams come up to me and say, hey, we are mob programming and we are going faster. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, we have 5 individuals on our team, and typically we would otherwise each of us take a separate story. And at the end of the iteration, generally some of us might be done and some of us were maybe running a little behind and stuff. They said, now we're doing well more than 5 stories, 7, 8 stories we were getting done in the course of the iteration. And I'd start hearing this fairly often. So I started thinking about it, like, what might actually speed you up? Because you have 5 people working one thing at a time. What could it possibly help that go faster than splitting the work up across 5 individuals? So to me, this is maybe the most eye-opening thing that as I started doing more, I would start seeing some of this firsthand, as well as hear it from other teams. Not always, but often enough to say, wow, that's actually pretty striking to hear that. So any thoughts about why mob programming might help you go faster than working as a bunch of individuals?
It's naturally reducing your whip. So
Okay, so why does that help you go faster?
less integration debt later on.
Okay, and there's other reasons behind the whip thing. And actually, I'm going to say that probably is the core reason it does. To understand that, I think you can go into a really good discussion around a lower amount of work in process or work in progress of whip can speed things up.
It also provides a platform for involving people that aren't programmers earlier in the process instead of having handoffs.
Yeah, there's none of that. Throw it over the wall and hope the next people picking it up understand it as well. Other reasons.
You spend less time beating your head against the wall for something someone else in the team goes, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and you have the whole team. So pair programming starts to improve that a little bit, but I think when you go to mob programming, it's, you've got everybody in there. There's got to be somebody on this team who certainly knows at least this corner of the system, if that's the thing we're concerned about. So absolutely is all much higher chance. I mean, if you don't have it at the whole team, you're not going to find it anyway. You're going to otherwise waste time going through the team first to say, well, can anybody help me? And then you realize nobody can. So yeah, you start to get the answers almost instantaneously in most cases, as opposed to, as you said, bang your head against the wall. Impediments block everyone, so they tend to get fixed. Thank you, Amitai. Absolutely. People are more focused. Yeah, we do. I mentioned earlier that pairing can make you build one of the better teams you'll ever see. This just maximizes that to 100%. Every once in a while, there are still individuals who can't work this way. And there are still individuals who are always going to be a frustration to some teams. And thankfully, they're a minority. I think most people can work this way. And I've absolutely seen a really cool team come out of doing this, even for just a few weeks. You can very quickly see the dynamic change to this level of we're pushing each other as a team. We're helping each other get things done more effectively. Most everyone builds skills, feels heard. The rotation throughout all the people on here allows everybody to have opportunities to learn how to listen, as well as when they're in the mob, help be a part of building a solution. Again, I've seen people that are natural wallflowers. It's a little pejorative, but I mean, we try and usually can help most of them. There still will be people who cannot come out of that, come off the wall and join the team. But again, those are pretty rare. I did come up with a list over the years, and I just add to it every once in a while. Somebody gives me, it's like, oh yeah, there's another one. So before we integrate the code, we're having the discussions we need. The rituals is one that I'm surprised no one mentioned. Nick, how many stand-ups have we done for the 3 months we've been on this project?
Approximately 0.
Okay, yeah, Stephanie, how many times have we had retros? Like formal 1 hour, 2 hour retros?
Oh God, formal ones, none.
None. How do we do retros?
We just say like at the end of the day, like, hey, what can we do better? Or even like in the middle, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do it that way. Let's try something else. It's not working right now.
Yeah. Pull requests. How many pull requests?
That's different. The client wants us to do a pull request.
No. Well, how many not counting that for our own stuff?
Oh, none.
0 within our team, 2 without our team, outside of our team.
And how many hours have we spent on Merge Hill?
None.
None. So, I mean, it's interesting. All those things go away. We don't, how many iteration planning meetings have we had?
Oh, no. I'm allergic to those things.
Yeah. So all these little ceremonies that if you look at, say, Scrum or even an XP introduce, I think things are a lot simpler. We come in, we know what we're working on. It's either what we did yesterday, or we just pick the next thing that has priority and we just go. So I absolutely relish not sitting through a lot of these meetings. I don't miss them one bit. So there's one. All the knowledge is there, all the wisdom is there. Everybody understands all the code because we all worked on it together. Some of us might forget it from time to time, but usually someone remembers. We build more consistent solutions because we've established our own kind of internal standards. We don't have to worry about one rogue pair kind of doing things their own way or whatever. Same with, I kind of overlap those two. I think we absolutely have minimized the amount of rework and defects that have come out of the process and so on. Impatience. Oh, I was trying to remember what I meant by this. Nothing's pairing or mob programming. I think for me personally, at least, nothing's more frustrating than watching people do something that they might take 30 seconds to do that you might be able to do with a half-second keystroke, let's say an IntelliJ ID or something. So we start to teach each other faster, more effective ways of doing things because we don't want to sit there and watch someone slog away for 5 minutes at the keyboard doing something that might take 30 seconds. So our impatience leads towards helping each other find the more effective route. Bringing new people in the team absolutely is much faster. And then back to the core idea, I think lowering the work in process to one has a lot of benefits. So some of the benefits of a whip of one.
You don't have that integration debt at the end where you have to integrate everybody's different pieces of work.
Yeah. What else?
No context switching.
No context switching, right? Yeah, that's costly. I don't think people realize how difficult it is to, as a software developer, to get deep into something and then end up, having to context switch to something else and re-ramp up on code. What about reasons from a pure, let's say, lean manufacturing or lean software stance? I mean, there's less organizational overhead, or you don't get into the notion of this constant backlog room. I mean, somebody is, but we aren't. We don't have we aren't sitting there managing a card wall typically. We just pluck things as they need to be done. I don't know if that speeds us up though or not. Oh well, something to chew on. One other thing I hear fairly often is we had a good day today. I remember I was at Ford. A few of us were doing work for Ford in Dearborn, Michigan, and we were actually flying out there fairly often. And I remember starting in January before COVID 2020, I started my team on my program. I got pushed to a new team. I'm like, well, we have an opportunity. Let's go get it into an office and start working together as a mob. And they're like, oh, this is kind of cool. And we're having a good time. We're getting things done. So that was really neat. COVID hit week of March 17th, whenever that was. And the first day you could tell people were like all panicky looking. It's like, oh my God. The end of the second day, though, I heard people say, you know what? This is great. I'm happy we're able to do this and it works remotely. Yeah, we had a great time doing this. Nick, by the way, how am I doing on time? I have like 10 minutes. Do we have like 10 minutes or so to?
We have about 15 left.
Okay, cool. So that to me meant a lot. And to me, I don't want to go through a day of software development where you're going to have bad days, but for the most part, this should be an enjoyable job, particularly if we're being productive. That to me actually enhances the amount of enjoyment I get out of it. This social effect that working as a whole team has also can dramatically help your level of enjoyment, most people's level of enjoyment. Anyway. And maybe go to why. So yeah, more often than not, what else is interesting is if I bring up the topic of mob programming to other people who haven't done it, they don't instantly react with like, oh God, that sounds horrible. More typically it's like, oh, that sounds interesting. You know, and they are usually concerned about the notion of putting 4 people on the team. So are managers always. But more people I think I've seen just as basically my experience is willing to try this. And out of the teams I've taken and taught them how to do it, so I would teach this in classes when I was working with a customer to coach them. I would more or less insist on it while I was there that we were going to do this. And I want to say 98, 99% of the people were up for it, particularly after doing it for a few days. Again, there's still the rare person who just can't work this way or doesn't want to. That's going to exist no matter. But yeah, it was a much easier sell. And once they experience it, more often than not, I would hear them say, yeah, this is a great way of working. We absolutely enjoy this. So let's transition last few bits of this and just talk briefly about how we make this work successfully. By the way, I'll go back to a core point I should have brought up front. I would never work as a solo developer remotely. And I think that is the typical notion of what remote development is you go home, you work in your office, you're alone all day, you're not conversing with people and so on. You're expected to get work done, and that's about it. So now I would never work that way. It just seems horrifying to me. And it seems like you would start to disconnect and disengage quickly, and you would be far less productive than if you had opportunities to be somehow collaborating with others. That's me personally. And I think I would love to hear some stories from people about their efforts as a solo developer throughout COVID and see how effectively they were able to get that to work. I honestly don't think it does very well. So there are a bunch of mechanisms that you can do remote programming. Earlier, I talked about this notion of screen share or screen share with remote control. So there's all sorts of technologies involved with screen share. I mean, we're doing Zoom, we share our screen as part of what we do, but you can certainly also remote control someone else's screen. Just screen share alone and not remote control seems more like this worker, rest, or pair programming pattern. It seems like it ends up being one person doing all the work, the other person falling asleep. No, I don't like that idea. The remote control I mentioned earlier, it's kind of laggy and it's kind of frustrating. At Outpace, I hinted at what is known as terminal multiplexers, which is basically you open a terminal and then use something known as tmux or tmate or screen. They're all mechanisms that basically do character mode transfers. So the really cool part about that is that once you type a character, the other person sees it almost instantaneously because you're not chunking across big blocks of data. So it's fast and it's effective and it feels like you are there. The downside is you have to work in a character mode editor, which for me wasn't Vim or Emacs typically. So that was really effective for us for 3 years. But you lose a lot since you're no longer in your little fancy VS Code or IDEA or whatever. There are IDE sync-based solutions. I'd also like to hear from folks about their experiences with that. So VS Code has something called Live Share. IntelliJ or JetBrains has something called Code with Me, I think. There is a tool called FluBits, which lets you have IDEA. The other person has VS Code. Another person has Atom. So each person can be using their own IDE. My experience with those, I don't know, less than stellar. They seem to have some issues with syncing at times. Sometimes they're file-based sync. Sometimes they're, I don't know. I think IDEA is a little more clever than that, but it just seems kind of half-assed in spots. Cloud-based IDEs are up and coming. There are gobs of them out there. I've never actually had the chance of working with one for any extended time. Yeah, as Anthony says, Code with Me doesn't fully support the features yet. All the refactorings. Oh God, damn, I couldn't use it. It's actually the main reason I don't use VS Code is because of refactoring support. As bad as it is in WebStorm for JavaScript, is far worse in VS Code. IntelliJ, IDEA, the Java one, it's fantastic. And if you ever worked with it, you would never give it up. It just speeds up things so much more. Cloud-based stuff, once I hear people saying it's real, it works, and it's got all the features you would want, I might think about doing it. The problem there is now you're locked into a vendor solution. So I don't know. Let's talk about Git handover. This is what we do every day. And it's effective, fast, easy to pick up, and works really darn well. So Git handover is this notion that you're all pushing code into a Git repo, whether it's on GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever. So imagine you have 3 developers. First developer is driver. The other 2 folks are navigating. So I'm driver, Stephanie and Nick are navigating me. I share my screen as a driver. I do my work, and then when I'm done, I essentially push my code up to the Git, the work in progress branch that we've got on the Git repository. Next person does a pull, they screen share, and they do their work. And when they're done, they push up again and off to the next person. There's a bit of overhead. If you were to do this yourself with straight up Git commands, it'd probably take a minute or 2 to do that screen swap. Not just a screen swap, but the code push up and pull down. So there's a tool out there that we happen to use along with this. It's known as mob or mob.sh, some people call it. There's a link to it. And it basically is a wrapper around all the Git commands you would need to do, which at times can be like a half a dozen of them when you're pushing code up. You might also have to remember that, oh, we've got push hooks, and we really want to turn those off because all we're trying to do with this tool, come back to here, is we're trying to shuttle the code from one person's machine to the next person's machine. If you think of it in that manner, then all we're trying to do is simplify that down to the point where it's really a single command that says, okay, get it off my machine, and the next person runs another command to get it on their machine without thinking about it. This tool does that. Basically, there's 2 core commands. One is after I've shared my screen, I do a mob start. I can tell it how long I want my session, 5 minutes maybe. I don't have to give it a number, but if you do, it'll tell you, oh, your time's up, mob next. I do my driving. I type the code in that my fellow navigators are helping me with. And then when my time is up or when we're ready, I type in the command mob next, press enter. It's in the repo. The next person comes along and does the same thing. They do a mob start. We do our work together. They do a mob next. So this shuttles the code back and forth. Every once in a while, and hopefully more, we're trying to get better at doing this more often, but we want to still be doing lots of small commits, as XP wants you to do as well with the notion of continuous integration. So we'll do what's known as a mob done, which puts us out, drops all of this work, cumulative work that we've been doing between mob start, mob next, mob start, mob next. It squashes it all. And then we can effectively do a mob done, which says, okay, we're creating commit and pushing that up. So then it's back to mob start, mob next for the next small piece of work that we want to commit. So the command set is simple. It is, again, literally a wraparound Git command. Every once in a while, someone forgets to do a mob next. It's all resolvable. If you know how to work with Git, then it's a pretty simple matter to get yourself unstuck if you ever get into trouble with this. We never lost any work this way, for one.
Yeah, the biggest thing to remember is the mob tool has no actual state inside of it, so it's just relying on what Git is doing under the hood.
Yep. Yeah. So, right. And we have gotten stuck a few times. It's like, let's go poke around and figure it out. There are some trade-offs with working this way. The key one is it's not great for short sessions of randomly gathered folks. I'm going to say its core point is for dev teams that are together. So in other words, in order for this to be effective, everybody that is participating has to have an IDE, some way of building code and running it and so on. So everybody's machine has to be set up. So for someone just wanting to jump in for an hour, it's not nearly as effective for them. But once it's set up, we don't worry about this. The other thing is everybody's machine stays set up since we're rotating through everybody. There's absolutely entropy amongst dev setups that over time it's like, oh shoot, I can no longer bring up the point of sale system server that we were working with. Crap. Well, the next person has it set up, so we can usually jump to them and then meanwhile start figuring out what's wrong with one person's machine. So it does help us keep everybody's machine set up, operational, and able to build and ship the code. The handovers are fast. We spend about 10 seconds on average going from one machine to the next to swap from one developer to the next. So it ends up not eating up what would be a whopping 1 or 2 minutes or more otherwise. So that's cool. Pretty foolproof. It's pretty hard to really break. And I think though the most important aspect we get out of this is you can try this screen share stuff and work on other people's machines, but now you're stuck not only with that downside, but you're stuck with whatever IDE they're using, whatever OS that they're using. Maybe you're on Windows or on the Mac. Maybe their keyboard settings are wacky, their shortcuts are wacky, and so on. To me, this is the big point here, which is I get to work at utmost comfort on my machine with my OS, my IDE, my keyboard, my shortcuts, and my normal speed. I'm not slowed down by any of this remoting process. So that to me is really cool out of this. So how about a quick demo? So
Sounds
Nick
good.
and I and Stephanie Stephanie, I don't think you have the code base. So I unshared, right? So let me share now the full desktop. We just have a simple little kata. We'll just do a few minutes of this and then call it. Let's see. So I'm going to start. So I'm going to be the driver. Nick's going to navigate me through this. Actually, you know what? Let me stop share briefly. Share this again with sound. And then share again. I want to do a mob start 1. Sorry. Oh, mob start 1. There we go. So this will do a bunch of Git commands, and it actually tells you the commands it's doing so you can figure out what's going on. It says you got 1 minute time and it ends in a little bit. We're just doing a simple TDD kata where we're going to be working one test at a time. There's already a little bit of code in place. So the test we're on is this. It trims the leading and trailing white space. And the whole idea of the kata, go ahead. Yes.
Yep, I was just saying, yep. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay, got it. So this kata's job is basically to take a person's name and then return it in last comma first order. So we have incrementally added features to that we're going to build one by one. So this one, it says it trims the leading trailing white space. So we've got big boy. It should come out as boy comma big. So I have a failing test. How do I get this passed, Nick?
So the quick and dirty way is just to add a trim to the name on line 8, right before the split.
Okay. All right, so name.trim.split, and maybe I don't know JavaScript so well, so thank you. I couldn't remember it's trim or
mob next.
Oh gosh, I got a mob next. Well, let me run the test. Did everybody hear the?
Everyone
mob
heard
next?
that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I got a passing test. We're not slavish about stopping at exactly 1 minute. We usually let people get a breath there and the concept. So at that point, though, I was instructed to do a mob next. I'll go ahead and enter that command. And it basically does a push back up to origin after creating a little mini commit, a work in progress commit. So I unshare, Nick can share, and then run the next one. So we'll just go through this and then open up the questions and close this out.
All right.
So how do we start this? You already did the mob start?
Yep.
Okay,
Already did the
cool.
mob
So
start right
mob
there.
starts there. All right, so uncomment, line 16 has the next test. Initializes a middle name. See that fail. All right, expected throw, Henry D. Okay, so let's see how far we can get with this. Okay, so we split this on the empty string. Oh, so we need middle name now, right? Okay, this gets more interesting. Well, I think we can start with just checking on the length of the parts. So let's just go for a road solution and we can refactor it later. So if it's not a mononym, it's going to be either a duonym with 2 name parts or it's going to have 3 parts. So it may be just if parts.length is 2, then we can return what we see on line 11, otherwise drop through and start worrying about the middle name.
Guess I didn't need the braces, but whatever, I've typed them now.
That can work. Okay, so let's just be declarative. Copy that down, and then we'll just add a middle name to the end. So add a little string interpolation thing there and just call it middle initial, I guess. So $ middle initial given parts. Title initial, you're gonna have to fix that. Back up to.
I see what it is now.
That's getting worse. Okay, that fair enough. That's not going to be there. So go ahead and option enter that. Okay, middle initial parts. So what's that going to be? It's going to be part sub part sub 1. And this is going to be badly coded, so we're going to obviously want to come back and refactor this. Part sub 1 sub 0 followed by a period, right?
Yeah, which I'll just do this way, I guess.
Okay. Wow, this is looking really awful, but that's okay. I think we might have a problem with the last name, but go ahead and run the test.
I'm also I got a mob next.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. I think that's enough of a demo to go with. We just bounce back and forth throughout the day this way through the 3 of us between Stephanie, Nick, and myself. We actually have a 4th member who joins sometimes.
I know it's.
What was that?
I know it's wrong. I'm sorry. Just talking.
Yeah, the last name is the problem.
Yep.
But it's fast. I mean, it's engaging. People are generally not distracted as much. The more people you have in the mix, we actually usually shorten the time from 5 down to 4 or 3 minutes. I've actually worked, Llewellyn Falco does this stuff where he actually does 1 minute rotation, which seems insane, but the amount of stuff you get done is like, that's pretty amazing how quickly we get this done and how quickly we have the answers that come up. So in any case, end of the day, I don't feel as beat up as I do with pair programming. I also don't feel like I was struggling with this intimacy that you get between 2 people when you have to pair. It is more of a group dynamic, and I think in general more relaxing as a result. All right, so I think that's pretty much all we have. Any thoughts or questions? And feel free to stay as long as you like. People want to drop off, feel like you can do so. So thanks for staying. But yeah, do we have any questions or thoughts?
It's
Go ahead, Ed.
interesting, and I'll acknowledge that I joined late, so I may be asking for a recap here. In terms of context, in terms of where this works, I'm thinking of basically the comment that the only thing worse than big design up front is no design. So how does this process take care of the initiation phase when you're doing proof of concept, you're ripping stuff out, you're not necessarily even doing unit testing yet because you're literally changing things so fast that it adds too much friction. How do you deal with those situations, or do you simply not hit them?
Well, we still have that sort of thing needed to happen. So if you're talking about, making sure we're all on the same page with where the design's going and so on, as well as just experimenting. First off, we don't always, right now on the project we're on, we don't always do, well, we can't do a lot of test-driven development because basically we're taking a lot of legacy code. Our job is a large part of to restyle it, and we don't have the time to write boatloads of tests. So we are a lot in kind of what you would call exploratory mode. So think of this structure of the Git handover is just a way of trying to keep things to small segments. If you think maybe 3 developers, you can go through, if you've ever done the tomato thing, Pomodoros. You can do the same kind of things. You come up with an idea to focus on and just say, like, look, let's try to brainstorm this for the next 20 minutes or whatever. You can still split that up into swapping between folks. We will diverge or simplify into, let's just talk about this for 20 minutes and one person has control. So nothing says you have to have these 5-minute segments every time. So it really is up to how the team needs to flow at the given time. We do try to get into this because it is where you're going to get the most benefits when you know what you're building. You can structure it into small increments and click forward rapidly that way. But nothing says you can't sit down and take a half hour or whatever necessary to poke at the code, look at things, scratch up some designs and so on.
Okay, yeah, I can see how this could potentially be very valuable, having done a lot of individual remote programming and teams that aren't necessarily even interested in going to the pair programming side, let alone this, which, as you said, the social dynamic is going to be very, very different. I'm in a situation where I'm basically being tasked to build a team from a couple of people who aren't one yet. So, yeah.
I mean, what I would suggest is say, look, let's try this for a week, full week, and we're going to sit in a room together because this is how we're going to learn each other and the system we're tasked with working on. See what they think. Stick to the rules. Stick to the 2 core rules of rotating and driver navigator, and I think you will come out of it. I think you're going to find things to tweak along the way, and most of it will be fairly obvious how to address the problems that are cropping up. I think the other thing that I always thought was cool about pair programming was if there are problems, they're going to surface like they did with Paul and I 20 years ago. You can't get away with them when you are sitting there working next to problem child every day. So it's going to rise to the level of being noticed and having to be addressed, and here even more so. And the cool thing is you can rectify them a lot more rapidly than letting things fester amongst solo developers or even pairs.
Interesting. I'll definitely enjoy watching the full video when you post it. And I have other things I would like to ask, and I'm going to yield the floor to see to it that other people have the space to ask questions.
Cool. And as mentioned, I'll stick around as long as people want to keep asking questions. And it looks like you might get your chance. Anybody? I usually give like 30 seconds. It's a presentation trick. It's like you wait until it's paid. The very first time, it's like nobody wants to talk or ask questions. So I will literally wait a full minute until someone asks a question. And it's really awkward the first time through, but it kind of breaks the ice.
Yeah, it does. It does help when you're standing in front of a group to at least give them a chance to react. So
yeah,
it's an interesting environment we're in. It's very corporate. I had to get access to be able to start installing stuff on a laptop. They're in a very restricted industry, so there's a lot of concern about data not going where it's not supposed to go, et cetera, et cetera. So putting these kind of tools on everyone's machine will take some effort. I've got one person who's located halfway across the country, another person who's in the local area. We're in the office 1 day a week. So if we're going to experiment with this, it's going to be the mob and the shifting thing, and it will be interesting to to see if this is something, it's almost like the kind of thing like perhaps set up the tools and then say, take an hour or two and a day or something and just start experimenting with it just to see how it flows and how it fits. I've got a very junior developer with a lot of business experience. I've got a master's in IT without much business experience. And then you've got me who's been doing software development for about 20 years, but has not done pair programming, although I've been intrigued by it on occasion. And I'm dealing with basically right now, I'm dealing with setting up a contract assembly or package for doing pipeline processing and kind of trying to figure out how to make all this stuff, like setting up services that run this stuff really simple. So it's like 5 lines of code and do stuff inside of async dispose and all the things I can think of that would simplify things for people actually churning the stuff out. But I'm not actually working in a collaborative manner with my team, I guess because it takes, some of them one of them catches on quickly, one of them takes like 5 or 10 minutes of explanations in different directions until they get to the point and say, okay, I understand this. But I don't know if it's that some people prefer to work in one way versus another. I mean, I've made that observation, but I don't know if that's just my bias, that I would see that some people are quicker at that than others. It's like, how do you balance all of that? It's
Right.
almost like I want to set this up first and then try to do the mob when we start churning stuff out. But again, I'm open to thoughts on how to try this in a way that allows us to function and not kill the deadlines we're being expected to hit. I've spent a month basically learning the people, the business, and finally the tech stack, and socializing a design, basically doing proof of concept, looking at code bases, identifying misconceptions about design, getting those corrected so people would finally say, well, I don't want to do this because of that. And then I'll talk to the person who's supposed to give them those directions. They're like, nah, we didn't tell them to do that. So finally now it's like, okay, we've got packages, we've got separation, we've got a basic design that we can migrate to. And now I'm just basically heads down, just myself, pulling together the core packages to make it work. And I'm kind of would like to be more collaborative, and yet in the environment with the people I question whether I could do that before we get to the point of trying to take this stuff, put it together and churn something out. So explain to me how you get there, because I like the way you operate. I've not seen it before, but I like it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a core concept here about getting things done, which is it's going to cost you longer if you can't even, trust that your own teammates are going to be capable of understanding what they need to know to build the right thing and to build it right. So in other words, yeah, if you got somebody and maybe they're new to the business side of the fence, letting them go off on their own devices to figure out what to build is just going to be a huge waste of time. They're going to build it wrong and it's going to have to be reworked and so on. So having said that, I think the way it plays out, I think the beauty of the way this plays out is, Stephanie, Nick, and I, we're working on a project where we're all asked to do CSS work to some extent, a lot of styling stuff, and nobody's an expert on that. And I would say nobody in most companies and most teams really knows it well. We all know how to futz around in CSS. And if you do have to do CSS work from time to time, yeah, nobody likes doing it, and not many people are an expert. Nick's pretty good at it. I know how to survive. Stephanie knows how to survive, but none of us are an experts. We actually pay for an expert. But the point is that we stop and spend the time collectively as we go through this. And if we can invite an expert in and have them quickly explain it, that's even better. Sometimes some of us know some things about, let's say, JavaScript that the others don't. So we will literally just say, stop, let's go play with this for 10 minutes. Let's make sure that after the 10 minutes is up, we all understand what this means. Sometimes we're trying to build a feature. We obviously, it's not just styling, we have to do some code changes, but we also have to understand how this thing is supposed to look and behave going forward. So we'll just say, look, stop, let's go get the business folks, have them pop in and sit with us for whatever it takes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. And once we get the answer, we tell them they can leave if they want. Often they stick around. So in other words, initially it's going to seem slow because we are halting to make sure that the knowledge is all shared. But that is part of, I think, what starts speeding us up rather quickly. I can guarantee I've had people personally in mobs day 1 and 2. It's like they weren't able to do this effective because they didn't know much of the technology, the language or whatever. Days 2, 3, 4, you started to see them like very quickly adding value to the mix. So I think you have to let the process give it fair time, which to me is probably a week or 2. And then I think you'll start seeing, is this effective for you or not? You might find out it's like, you know what, maybe we can't work this way, but I promise you will have gotten a lot of value just by having worked together for that week or 2. That will lend itself towards returning on the rest of the project, because you'll have started to understand each other, how to communicate with each other, where each other's weak points are and are not, and so on. So just that aspect alone should start to help.
Yeah, I think it's something that I may attempt. I'll be looking at some of these tools, and I think I'll do it when I basically have something to show and say, okay, we're setting up a whole bunch of services. Here's the 5 lines of code, and here's the packages that we're going to hook together to make that happen. Now let's go work inside the packages to do all the business logic, and for that we just get together and jam. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, it will be interesting.
We blow so much time by not being willing to collaborate, just dumb things like, okay, I got to figure out how to deploy this or something of that effect. And then we'll sit there and stew for 15, 20 minutes. And it's fascinating. Instead in the mob, it's like, no, you got your answer in about 10 seconds. So I think at times we spend orders of magnitude, we waste orders of magnitude more time than needed just because we don't have the right people in the room. And we're not willing to raise our hand and say, hey, can you help me on this? Well, that doesn't always work because that person's not there to help you, or they're too busy or whatever. So the beauty here is you get everybody. It may seem like at times some of this is a waste of time to have everybody there, but I think, long run, though, it more than pays off time-wise.
Yeah,
we could go ahead. I'm sorry, Ed.
Yeah, I figure if we start consistently putting even 1 or 2 hours a day and just keeping track of our productivity. We've got so many stories we want to get through. If we suddenly find that couple hours a day is punching way above its weight, then that will be a pretty good reason to say, okay, let's dial this thing up a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that can work. I wouldn't limit it to too small because then I don't know. I think I'd say do it like a half a day at least. If you do it like 1 hour or 2 hours a week, I think it's not going to be quite as. I think you need to get into this very immersive mode before you can kind of say this is going to work well.
Yeah,
So
I was thinking maybe 1 or 2 hours a day. I mean, we have too many meetings during the day. If we actually have a period of time that we code together, then and we're doing it consistently, I'm hoping we get into the flow. But you're telling me maybe it has to be a longer period to start to.
I mean, honestly, I wouldn't discount it by not, if you can't do that, fine. Maybe find a way to have a kickoff day. Do like one day where you can do a half a day or even a full day. And then it's like from here on out. Because there's a lot to shake out. You've got to get the tools working. You got to feel comfortable about just dumb little mechanisms like how do we screen share effectively and so on and so on. How are we all set up working in the same environment? Blah, blah, blah. So there's a few things that have to shake out. So I'd say if you can find 3 or 4 hours the first time out, at least. That's good.
Okay.
After that, I think if you can stick to a daily 1 to 2 hours, yeah, you're going to find a lot of benefit from that.
Fair enough. That sounds like a direction for us to go, especially if we get a nice little gap in when some third party doesn't meet their commitments and we're kind of not as much under the gun.
If you get stuck, I got work to do too, and we're under the gun. But I'm more than happy to help out. Like if you're stuck on the tooling, and you have a way of doing this, I can sign an NDA if you want. I can pop in for 10 minutes and quickly resolve some things for you. Like if you're stuck on the mob tool or whatever.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll,
thing I
I'll
wanted to
keep that in mind. I don't know what level I'd have to go to get this. This is an insurance company and they have a very interesting process. I've looked at it from, it's like I've identified and fixed a couple of misconceptions within the dev team. And between my opposite number as a team lead with the offshore and someone on my team. And I've also looked at it from a lean manufacturing perspective and noting that QA is a major bottleneck. And yet the ramp up time to bring someone in is kind of set by the process of the bureaucracy, and it's not agile at all. Then you add the training time for them to become productive. And it's like, yeah, they're not going to be able to scale QA, which we are using and we have to use to get QA to approve what we're doing. It's simply the structure they have. So it's like, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing bottlenecks, and there's a limited amount that I can do. Getting an NDA to bring someone in, I think that would be pretty spectacular. I would have to.
Yeah.
No
No surprise there.
Yeah, be more like I would probably Zoom you and just kind of walk and kind of try to walk through it, or better yet, just set up the same tools and just walk and just do a pair program, like almost a mob style programming, just to make sure I understand what I'm doing and what I'm supposed to look at.
Right.
Yeah,
And I
maybe
think
that.
I don't have to see your code at all. We can do all sorts of stuff without you having to see your code. So
I guess, yeah, it's true. It could just be a dummy piece of code.
yep, give me a
Or
terminal and keep the IDE off the screen, and all we need to do is worry about the mechanisms. Yeah.
Could be. Well, in any event, I will certainly keep that that possibility in mind. And I guess I'm sure your contact information is in this
It's
thing somewhere.
somewhere. I'll post it in the chat here. So the QA thing is interesting, and that's almost invariably the way things are. The cool thing would be is if you can over time just kind of encourage and invite the QA folk to sit in your mob as you do things. It ends up being extremely effective, and they can come and go. I would suggest read a little bit more about it too. There's a lot of sites. I provided a few links. Just dig about, and there's a lot of good thoughts on how to do this well. Actually, if you email me, I'll drop you some simple starter links.
Okay, cool. I will. Let me grab that from the chat. Yeah, I made a point of befriending our QA person so that they would so that I would know what their issues were, like asking them if you were able to do this, but like bring on people in a timely fashion, what are your barriers? What is it like when you try to do this? And I got chapter and verse. I now know what's involved. I now know why they can't surge effectively when we have work that has to be, and why they're a bottleneck. So, and we're starting to document that to make the case. But yeah, it's interesting. You certainly bring another dial. The idea of not dealing with stand-ups. In order to start creating our team, I actually ended up creating a stand-up meeting so we at least see each other once a day. So that was my only thought before this as to how to at least get this off the ground in terms of people behaving like a team. We're even trying to get to the point of doing our own grooming and estimation. This is an onshore, offshore, big offshore, small onshore.